morning. An AI model could be trained on every email you have ever written, every social media post you've made, every video of you speaking, every article written about you, every survey you filled out, your medical history, your job evaluations. A very complete personal history might include recollections you recorded in your diary or in the notes for that memoir you were thinking of writing. Setting aside the heavy burden of collecting all these things, a very convincing representation of what you know, how you express yourself, even what you likely think is possible. Digital clones hold immense potential for capturing and delivering human knowledge, offering benefits from businesses, capturing corporate knowledge for continuity across generations of staffers, to personalized learning from your forebears and preserving legacies of cumulative family knowledge. Today is Labor Day, September 1st, 2025, and this is the Daily AI Show. I'm joined by Brian and Junmi, and we are discussing the future of personal data about you, wrapped in an intelligent and expressive AI that can preserve and deliver that unique combination of experience and perspective that is you. Imagine a world where the insights of a departing expert in your company or a beloved family member's wisdom could be preserved and interacted with long after they're gone. This isn't science fiction, it's the reality of digital clones using advanced LLMs. So digital clones are virtual replicas empowered by AI designed to mimic human work behavior, communication, and decision-making. Today, we're going to explore this transformative potential for knowledge capture and delivery alongside some critical legal, ethical, and privacy considerations necessary for their safe and effective deployment in companies or in your legacy long after you've gone. So, digital clones. I want to leave the introduction at that and turn it over to my colleagues and say, are you getting ready? Are you getting ready to make a version of yourself that you'll deliver in some format or not?
Well, I'm going to get ready to move to Denmark. That's going to be my move. And the reason for that is because Denmark is one of the first, I'm sure it's not the first, to push forward some legislation. Now, it doesn't 100% directly correlate to the idea of digital clone, but it's in the same area, and it's about who owns your likeness, right? So you're talking about digital clones, Andy, and perhaps you decide and you will put it in your will or otherwise, and you tell your family, hey, I'm okay with this. Should the technology get to a point, I've done the Daily AI Show. There's lots and lots and lots of me talking, plus all, my memoirs and all that. I give you the hum and hum. You're allowed to create a digital clone. Well, Denmark has put some laws around where that would be okay. And even though they're not speaking specifically about a digital clone, that is wrapped in some of their framework. And basically, if we were just to summarize this, essentially in Denmark, Andy or your family would have a copyright. In fact, everybody has a copyright on their likeness, their voice, and their characteristics, right? And by the way, if you're in Denmark and you're not a citizen, you're not Danish, that still applies to you if you're in the country at that time. And what they've essentially done is said, look, this is a copyright, and this copyright goes 50 years post-death. Right. So they're saying that's not even just for famous people. That's for everybody, those protections go 50 years beyond your death. They do reserve for things like satire, obviously, and political, comics and things like that, where obviously people are doing satire. It's part of that side of it. And there's some protections there. But basically what they're saying is, hey, you own your own copyright to your digital likeness, which would extend to your digital clone. And should you pass, that also, at least in Denmark, would pass to the people who are your successors, whoever's in your will, who owns your estate, essentially, and they would control that and have the ability to do, I guess, whatever on your behalf for 50 years beyond your death. So I think I just wanted to bring that up at the top because there's just a clear indicator, a line in the sand that somebody in the world has said, hey, this is important and we want to make sure that everybody has copyrights. In fact, I hope that this sort of catches fire through the EU and more EU countries are starting to follow this lead. And there's a really good indicator that they're curious if the Denmark solution is going to get swallowed up, or perhaps other EU's or countries are going to follow this lead and stuff. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see where this goes as sort of a test bed. But I would definitely want to live in a country where there was automatic copyrights to my digital likeness for sure. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'd like it to extend to all data is inherent copyright of the ones that create it. But that's a far more powerful move, and that'll take a lot more movement in that direction. But I think it's important to have those kinds of frameworks in place so that we mitigate the potential pitfalls, right? And that's kind of one of the things that we're identifying here. The fact of having a digital clone in and of itself might be very useful, especially in the terms of the kind of application. But if you don't protect how that's accomplished and how it's rolled out and having the roadmap laid out for it, the problem that you run into is there's plenty of pitfalls. There's plenty of ways for it to be mistreated, misused, and completely not aligned in the way that you want to, right? Especially since data is forever. So you make one thing right now as your digital clone, and it being manipulated for the rest of time that doesn't sit right? Though I do think there are plenty of positives, right? In terms of personal use, being able to, whether you have a knowledge base with friendly demeanor and essentially your essence as a personality, right? Being able to be that knowledge base for friends, family, loved ones, all of that. That sounds like an interesting application to me. On the business side of things, on the corporate side of things, I understand everybody's time is limited, right? We all have the same amount of hours in a day. So if you want to have a greater level of reach, having a digital clone, being able to take care of or apply to a very specific path or a very specific vector for application or access to you, or the amount that people actually need, right? That's one of the ways that a lot of creators out in the space now work. Is it's the amount of access is how you monetize and create revenue and things like that. So AMAs or office hours, those kinds of things. But not everybody needs that direct access to you. Sometimes they just need your basic knowledge base. So having a digital clone of you presenting that knowledge base data within those specific parameters sounds perfectly fine to me and useful, I think. All right. I think it does get into a little choppy waters, and this kind of Beth has kind of said this when this kind of question comes up in the past, is that when you're having conversational or interaction where the conversation is both ways, that becomes the waters become a little more choppy there, because you're not necessarily in charge of or aware of or monitoring what the content and the context of those particular conversations become. So having just a Jumi clone where we're talking back and forth, and it's a great conversation, that builds a relationship and a knowledge base that Jumi 1.0 may not necessarily know all the ins and outs of, because the reason why I created the clone in the first place was to ask simple Q&A. Be my living FAQ, if you will. And so if that expands beyond the specific parameters that I want to set, it gets a little murky, because how can I reliably then communicate with that person, because they've had an entirely different relationship with my clone version than myself. And I think this is what a lot of celebrities in these parasocial relationships kind of create, especially now with the advent of Twitch streaming and the live streamers as a whole. They sometimes spend 4 to 8 hours a day just talking to people in chat, not knowing who these chat people are, and that parasocial relationship could potentially develop. And then if they meet them on a street or at an event, they have no idea. It's like, oh yeah, I talked to you about the da da da. It's like, sorry, man, that was 10,000 people, 4 months ago, that kind of situation. So I think if we're going to have any implementation of this, and I think the low hanging fruit here is a more interactive or parametered level of interaction, right? We're going to see a lot of AI avatar type of content creation, lots of stuff on social media, sponsored stuff, marketing stuff, advertising stuff, those kinds of things, where there's already a natural separation. But as the separation gets closer and closer, and people develop closer and closer relationships with these avatars, then that's where the questionable part comes.
Great. So I definitely like the point that you earlier made, Brian, about copyright and rights to your likeness, so that you can control a misrepresentation of you individually in the form of a deep fake avatar expressing something that you don't have any control over, and that could have been modified after the original permissions or cooperation on your part were done, either in a corporate context or for your personal legacy. And Junmi, thank you very much for kind of laying out the full landscape of just how this can impact. I want to share now some screens of some companies that are doing this work, and see what we can learn from that approach. So let me show this. This is a company called show on stream. There it is. Okay, this is a company called Delphi, and this is a pretty substantial company, and I'll show you why I think that. So they're about creating an expert version of yourself that can be scaled in terms of access. So, if you're a celebrity or you're a knowledge worker, an influencer, if you want to have a digital avatar, or even just a chatbot that represents your knowledge, this is a collection in a specifically tuned model. And I'll tell you what the model is here in a little bit, but a specifically tuned model that is not just any old frontier model out there. It's a special, very tightly constrained model to ensure that what is ever said by the avatar that you create on this platform is in tight alignment with what your training is of that model. It's not going to get jailbroken or suddenly spin out into its own pre-trained knowledge and start to opine on things that you didn't know anything about. So that's an important aspect of it. Let me go and just show you this next screen. This is the pricing for this model. And you can see that you can create your own digital mind for free. And then if you're a creator and a professional, you want to have chat and or video access or even voice calling access to that, you can kind of bump up and create something. And now I want to show you one of the implementations of this, which is at the Harvard Business School. So this is a suite of tools that are now, if you look at the URL up here, this is alumni.hbs.edu AI tools, and then chat with Tom Eisenman, who was a classmate of mine and is now a professor at the Harvard Business School. And this is using Delphi. And Delphi, is trained with all of Tom's writings, all of his course notes, everything that he has, contributed to this version of him. And so I just tried this out, and I gave him a little, brief on what I'm doing in the entrepreneurial space. Tom is the head of the entrepreneurial curriculum at Harvard Business School. And then it comes back with a chat interaction that is, quite professional. Doesn't really know that, even though I said, "Hey, what's up, old friend?" He says, "Oh, great to hear from you. It sounds like you've been on quite a journey with this project." Doesn't have any context of me and Tom actually knowing each other in a prior lifetime. But it goes about, presenting a very coherent and well-informed guidance on, how to, develop this entrepreneurial objective that I have that I described in my introduction. So very interesting. I found it kind of useful to have access to his sort of full writings and experience as represented by this Delphi model, and to be able to ask him questions about my particular situation. And I didn't see in this context the ability, as you can with many other models, to upload a file so that I could give him a lot more context than I could, kind of accomplish by just chatting with him. But it's a very early implementation of what I think will ultimately be, a natural extension of what AI professors are, right? So, or AI, empowered professorial presence is on the campus. You can talk to your professor, as is the case here, without necessarily, committing to the office hours. All right, now I want to just quickly move on to this company. I'm not sure where they're located, but they're abroad. And this company, Eternity AC, is really focused on this idea of, capturing your experience and your expertise. And they got a good bit of press, and they use a bunch of technology in their stack. They have multiple languages. They're located in Dover, Delaware, as a corporate entity, but I believe that they're primarily European in their sort of catchment of market. And they're notable because a consulting firm used them early on in 2024 to create digital clones of all of their consultants, and created chatbots, and then offered a service like that to allow you to use chatbots that were basic representations of specific individuals in your organization in order to, again, scale access to them, primarily in customer support, sales, etc. So you could talk to them. Finally, this is the consulting firm, powered by Eternity AC. Jet BI is a consulting firm over somewhere in Europe, somewhere, I guess. And they now, they at least published the availability of services to create chatbot development along these lines, like capturing your specific knowledge. And then finally, I'll just say there's very, very few examples of this happening for individual consumers wanting to capture a sort of a digital legacy thing. But here's one that has, like now 2 years ago is the latest posting in their YouTube stream and so on. So they offered this idea of capturing your digital clone, but I don't think they got any traction whatsoever. And I'm going to point out that one of the hardest parts of this thing is getting all the data that you want, and collecting that in forms that can be added to a retrieval database that has to be attended, because you're not going to train an entire model on your corpus of output. You're going to have a database about that is using a model like Delphi, for example, or a frontier model to generate the responses of your digital clone. And then what we haven't talked about yet, and you can see this kind of the focus of what I was showing you, is still in the sort of text chatbot range, and not trying to represent that I'm speaking in real time to you as I am today, as an avatar, a video avatar of it. But the technology for the video avatar component of this is getting very real time, let's say, and very, very good. And there's actually a new API that's been offered by OpenAI, which it goes beyond their real-time API that was made for real-time voice, and goes much further than that in terms of performance and response types. And that's a new API that they've developed. And so you see that the technology infrastructure and the sort of the early vanguard of the proponents of this kind of digital cloning, both for corporate applications and for personal legacy, are at the cutting edge, if you will, and breaking the ice in delivering something that would actually be available to you to generate something that is a controlled and persistent clone of what you've learned and what you know.
I think what I gather from this, and Andy, you talked about this early on with the show too, is whereas maybe initially the thought was, oh, and it still would be fine, record your voice about your life, basically have ChatGPT or some version of that come up with a whole host of questions with some input from you about, basic things, where I grew up and stuff like that. Maybe I want to record some of my earliest memories growing up in Long Island, which I didn't live very long. I was only there till I was about 7. But I have memories from there, and I don't know that my daughter really knows anything about that. I don't know my wife really knows much about that. It was early on, most of what I would talk about would be like Georgia from when I was there in 87. So doing that, but then now what you have me thinking about, Andy, is at first it was like, write it down and get it connected. Now I think, okay, voice for sure, because the models are getting smarter to natively understand voice without having to go through the intermediary of transcription. And we see this more and more and more. This is happening with multimodal, where there's not the intermediate step. Obviously latency comes way down because it doesn't have to do 4 steps anymore. It only has to do 1. But then what I'm thinking too is like actually recording you on camera would even be the better way to do it. Like actually having it record you, and probably not just sitting at a chair like I am right now at a desk. I mean, this would definitely be the most comfortable, but it almost makes me wonder if it should be more full body and stuff. And the reason I say all this is just to say that you're right. Like Delphi and all these, they're certainly coming up with solutions that allow people to have this, control their own future digital clone, right? Which I think is the most important, or that your family has rights. Like I said earlier, I think that's important as well. But also like what you can control right now is the gathering of data, because even the best of the best of the best future technologies, they'll be able to make little leaps and jumps between bits that it knows about your life, but it won't be able to literally replace what you know. Like that's beholden to you. So it does require people who are interested in doing this. Like you're going to have to transcribe, you're going to have to tell your story, you're going to have to answer questions and stuff like that. Knowing that even though today there's probably not a great 100%, solvable solution where any and all of that information can be gathered and put back into some sort of, interaction with my digital twin in the future. But that it will be able to do that. I mean, I feel confident about that, right? We can see where the technology is going. The real roadblock right now is don't wait too long to digitize your memories and your memories. I mean, plain and simple, right? And then I'll just say the other thing is too, I've talked about this on the show, like There's people who feel all different ways about it. I was talking last week about doing the photos and having the photo. I had the photos colorized and then moving a little bit. My dad liked it. But even him, I was saying like, yeah, you got to be careful. Like, cause if your dad doesn't smile that way. And actually I was just at the college football kicked off this weekend. So we're doing my wife and I host the Georgia football watch parties in our area. And I was just talking to another couple who always comes out every year and hangs out with us and for the games. And he said, yeah, my brother did something similar like that with my dad. He said, but the smile was not my dad's, and it threw me. And I said, yeah, see, this is the problem, right? This is the problem of we can do this right now, but how do you faithfully recreate? And to me, the only way that I know to actually protect that is to handle it yourself. Because if I'm on recording, if all these shows, these 500 plus shows we've done here, my mannerisms, the way I talk, the way I say things, the way I laugh and all that are going to be really, really important for that digital clone. Now, I've also said I'm the type of person that would have no problem, me personally, talking to a digital representation of my mom who passed in 2008. I would have no problem with that. I think I would find it comforting. I personally do not have a problem with separating what's real from fiction. I think it would have more benefit in my life than not. But I also realize just from the comments and conversations we've had on the show that does not apply universally. So there's a lot of really weird gray areas of this. Like, who gets to decide if the person's already passed? Who gets to decide what mannerisms or ways that the clone, how is it interpreting it through its master system prompt, as we would call it today? How does that get done? Who's the keeper of the master system prompt? Is it the closest relative? Is it somebody who claims, well, I knew them the most in the last 10 years of life, I took care of them? But then some child says, a grown up, adult who was that person's child says, yeah, but I lived in the house with them for 20 years. And they say, yeah, but that's not the same person they were at the end of their life that they were at the beginning. They said, well, I knew him as this person. Well, okay, I knew him for the last 10 years and they were much more refined, and they would have never said that. They had matured and grown up, and certain things they wouldn't have said in 2025 that they might have said out loud in 1995. I'm in that category. I don't want my digital clone of the past using the words that I would have used and thought were okay in 95 with my friends. I don't have to say them here. We all know what was socially acceptable to say, and I'm not talking about racial. I'm just talking about terms that, weren't appropriate, but we would throw them around real fast. No problems, because that's just what it was. And we didn't think anything of it. You wouldn't catch me dead today saying those words because they're not appropriate, and we've all moved on, and that's what it is. So wait, hold on. Who gets to decide what version of Brian is out there forever? And I think that kind of goes to what you were saying too, Jimmy. Like, it's tricky. It sounds like, there could be a lot of good here, but man, I don't know. Somebody has got to be able the keeper of the keys and figure out, if you're in charge, what do you do with it? And frankly, there's going to be a lot of families of formerly maybe famous people. Your Burt Reynolds, who I was just talking to Gwen in the comments about, like, they're using his voice. Just because that person was famous doesn't mean that the person who's in charge of that estate is also like rich or has tons and tons of money. There are tons of situations where you might be the keeper of the keys of a famous ancestor, right? That's still in that 50 year, if that was the range or whatever, and you're in charge of their digital clone, and you got to pay the bills. And so now, you know what I mean? It's like, it gets really, really tricky. And if that gets out there, people who are fans of that person, maybe it's Elvis or something like that, goes, I don't love this, man. I don't love that Elvis is in the new Budweiser commercial. And they're like, yeah, but Graceland has decided that's okay, and they're really the ones that do it. But all these fans of Elvis are like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Elvis singing about the Clydesdales, So I don't know. There's just a lot here. I love this conversation, but it's just like there's like endless questions and what ifs with this, which I think is what makes it so fascinating to me, because who knows? All I know is that it will be possible. I think we all agree it'll be possible. It'll feel very, very, very lifelike. And it'll be nearly indistinguishable, if not indistinguishable, from the person, the digital clone. That I feel like is an assured thing. Everything else in between is tricky.
Yeah. So I wish we had Aaron on the show, who's really practiced, with HeyGen and other video clone training requirements, because I want to do as an exercise toward the ultimate creation of a digital clone of myself based on, you know, my personal recollections of the path of my life. Not for the purpose of, you know, aggrandizing what I did. I'm an obscure individual in a corner of the world here, but because I lost a ton of information by not having the time to ask my father what happened just in the basic, you know, sort of progression of his life. I mean, I know the high level outline of it, but I don't know details that I really wish I could turn to something as a reference and say, okay, you know, what was he doing after he was a professor in East Lansing, Michigan? You know, like what happened there between then and this other thing 5 years later? You know, what was going on in that period of time? I had no one alive to turn to who has any knowledge of my father. So to your point, Brian, yeah, you know, don't wait to capture the details in some form, you know, and there isn't any simple way to lay that out. And that's one of the $1 million ideas that we have here, which is, you know, some AI assisted process that will collect the important waypoints of your life. And then you can fill in more and more detail as time goes on, and if you have the interest. But the basic structure of it, the progression of events and jobs and relationships and you know, domiciles, all of those things, just so you know that history is locked down and kept somewhere that's going to be preserved. That's the foundation of it. So I want to do that. But ultimately, I'd like to take what little remains of my father, which includes a lot of video. We have, you know, like VHS videos and everything of him speaking, laughing, and, you know, all his mannerisms are there. But the reason I wish Aaron were on the show is I think it's prohibitively expensive to truly train an AI video avatar on a wide range of facial expressions and everything else, and
right
mannerisms.
now.
So the mannerisms that you're talking about, I don't think those are accessible at this point. Like, you know, I have multiple modes of expression.
And again,
right now
what
I'm
age,
getting
Andy,
serious,
right?
and my hand's doing this, right? You know, or then in a different mode, I'm you know, having a very different expression, very different articulation, and different voice inflections, and those mannerisms go together. And I don't think that there are any video avatars that are that sophisticated to capture something and reproduce it as real life.
No, I mean, look, my grandpa could give a look to my grandma that would send her through the roof. And we all knew it. And all he had to do is just kind of raise his eyebrows. I have a hat on, but he would raise his eyebrows a little bit. And if he really wanted to send her into the stratosphere, he'd say, okay, Marie. And there was nothing more cutting. And like, we would just watch my grandparents, and he would have like that little smirk would go up in the corner of his mouth, and he'd raise his eyebrows and look at me and my brother, who is his grandkids. You know, this is years and years and years ago. I have these memories like they were yesterday, being in the back of the car. My grandmother's giving us mints out of the glove compartment, and she would get on Jack, blah, 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 like get on his case, and he would just raise his eyebrows and kind of look back at me and my brother, and you just thought, it's premeditated. He knows what he's about to do. He knows how much trouble he's about to be in. And we just look back and have that stupid little smirk. But like, how do you, like, even if he hadn't said, okay, Marie, how do you capture that? That's a memory. That's a core Pixar memory, you know, like, you know, in my brain of him doing that. But how would you faithfully do that? And would other people find that to be as helpful or as true to his nature, my grandfather's nature? Also, I know him as my grandfather. I only know him for a certain year. So then it comes to the, you know, Jimmy and Andy, it's like, do you need this is the perfect version of this some sort of overlapping? It's my viewpoint of my grandfather, but of course his children's viewpoint. Now, my mom has passed. This is my mom's dad. But her two siblings are still, no, I'm sorry. One of her siblings is still alive. So his son, Jack, his viewpoint, obviously, he's sort of the last line in that. There's a couple of uncles and great uncles that are around that knew my grandfather way back in the day and stuff. So do you need this like cross thread in order to get a true representation? Because I'm not wrong. If I was to create a digital twin of my grandfather and say, this is a faithful representation, somebody could go, yes, Brian, but only from 88 to 95 when he passed away. That's the only time you knew him. What about all his Entenmann days? What about all his his military days, and he was in the Seabees, and all this stuff that I'm aware of, but I have no recollection or knowledge of other than just passed down little pieces like you were saying, Andy. So I don't know. Again, it goes back to like, what version of your dad? What version of my mom? My version? Is that what matters? And if so, do I keep that private? Do I do it just for me? Do I say to my dad someday, if this was ever possible, because my dad's still alive, and I would never, ever, ever do anything to disrespect him or my memory of my mom through his eyes. Like I said last week with the pictures, right? I would just stop cold if my dad said, don't do it. That's the end of the discussion. I wouldn't do it because I would never want to disrespect him. However, I could go possibly to my dad in the future and go, Dad, I have the ability now to do this faithful, echo representation of mom. I just wanted it around the house for me, or even just on my phone. Do you have any problem with that? I don't want to make it public. I don't want it to be for other people. This is for me and my comfort of my mom and stuff. I don't know. I like I said, I think there's 1,000 answers here.
That makes me think about, if you're talking about preserving your mom as accessible just privately to your family and to you even, think about what's required to retain some fidelity about your mom. So you work hard to get the prompts right, and you do the training that's necessary to have a visual representation of your mom that you can interact with. And then 5 years passes, and that particular stack that you use to do it, it's no longer being supported. You have to upgrade to the next model.
Right.
And there's model drift. Just like we went from 4.0 to GPT-5, suddenly there's a new model driving your mom, and it's not her. What? I lost my mom. That's the same thing that happened to all the people who had a personal relationship with the voice of 4.0
100%.
and lost it. So now digital legacy has to be really persistently high fidelity to what you want. And I'm not sure we have the technical architecture to do that right now.
Yeah. Can you imagine holding onto your phone and like, this is a 16, but cut to 10 years from now and it's a 26, right? It's the iPhone 26. And I've got a 16, and the version that I know and love that I've created and curated of my mom's digital twin only now works here, and the battery is dying and I can't keep it going. Can you imagine the emotional toll that would have on people? I mean, serious emotional toll. So I think you're absolutely right, Andy. Like, not only do you have to sort of think about all that stuff, you have to think about what model is, and then protecting that model to make sure that that's the future iteration. Or Gwen and other people were bringing up, like, wait, hold on, do these digital twins grow with time? Jimmy, you brought up the other idea too. Like, if it's my mom passed in 2008, does her knowledge of her digital clone, should it exist in the future? By the way, I don't think I have the ability to do this. I don't think I have enough to grab for my mom, but regardless, if I did, she passed away in 2008. She would have a basic memory of Facebook. She would have a basic memory of where, the cell phones were going. Should I be able to talk to her about things that are happening in 2025? Her knowledge cut off in 2008. Of course I could give her clone access to all knowledge, and say, well, it's still mom talking about current events, but is that right?
And that's the danger of using a broadly highly pre-trained model as the foundation for such a representation, because the model will try to satisfy you by giving information that it has access to that your mother did not. And now you're not speaking to your mother anymore. You're speaking to some extension, unpermitted extension into the realms of deep latent representations in the deep neural network that have nothing to do with your mother. And that's why, by the way, this Delphi platform chose not to use a frontier model. They use an 11 billion tensor model from Google. It's a very small model. It's made just to take that knowledge corpus of the Harvard Business School professor or your professional data, and present that with really tight guardrails. It doesn't have a bunch of other broad knowledge about the world. It's not going to call upon those things. And the same might be necessary for a platform that you would entrust, the representation of your mother to, right? So, or my father. I wanted to ask you guys now, if you were going to do this exercise today, just to do the rudimentary first cut at, your mom, in your case, Junmi, I don't know who you're going to do your digital clone of, but we're talking about the legacy of some past human, my now deceased father. What would you use as the system stack for that? What do you have to collect? What do you have to put it into? And then what do you have to do to train that AI model to respond as if your mother, as if my father?
Jimmy, you can take a shot at that. I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe I don't know that there is a stack for it right now, but maybe I don't know. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah. My concerns is the level of control over what the result would be. So
I mean, the
everything,
responses from the model?
well, beyond that, just where the data lives, where the model lives, where everything resides. It would, whatever the solution would be, it would have to be open source. I would have to have my own version of it. I would, if I could train it myself, great. If I can fine tune it myself, great. If I can build out all the tool sets and everything that we need, I would want to do it all on-prem, localized, and I have full control of A to Z, the complete process. I do not want the potential for lack of a better term, corrupting influences, right? Because I'm going to be dealing with very intricate balance of personality versus knowledge versus, the even on a basic sense, the temperature, right? All these weights that I have to control for the model. And so, and I need to make sure I know exactly the data that's going in for the training data. I need to be control. I need to control every single aspect and step so that I can create one, peace of mind, and two, create a faithful representation. So regardless
very
of
good
who
points.
that is.
But it sounds like you would do an open source local device, like on your computer. You would do a training sequence using information about that person, and you would actually train the model doing that. So you're going to do fine tuning on top of a basic open source model. Now, most of the open source models, even the smaller ones, have pretty broad pre-training, and so they have a lot of information. So
I might have to create a model myself from scratch. That kind of thing.
Okay, so setting aside that really careful and thoughtful approach that's going to prevent the let's call it the wandering of your model's responses into realms that aren't relevant to your ancestor. What if you wanted to just do something simple, nothing really private to the degree, just as the basic outlines, so that you could have a responsive AI answer questions about the basic facts of that ancestor's life, almost like a genealogy record, right? So, who were your brothers and sisters, and tell me what you know about them. Because go 1 degree, there's 2 degrees of separation from me, and I have no recollections of my uncles and aunts and everything except for some really young thing. But my training data might have more information if I collected that deliberately and I put that in there, but it's nothing really personally identifiable information that could be exploited in some way. Now, if you're going to do that, what would be a simple way to accomplish that? Because it's not easy. You can go to one of these companies out there that provides it, but I don't trust any one of those companies to last long enough to commit to a legacy archive. So Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
okay.
I got my answer too, but go ahead.
Okay. So if you want off the shelf really quick, but you want it to be a certain level of interactivity,
Yeah.
you could use the new real-time API from OpenAI. They just released that. It's very responsive. It's got audio connection. You can put a avatar or video layer on top of that by using the new HeyGen 4 avatar to handle like a video aspect. And that will give you the basic framework. And then, you just put it all together into an interface that you want to use. But those are some of the basic tools that you would use. There's a couple other things that I think you'd have to fill in the gap, but those
Importantly, the
would
database side of it, right?
yeah. That for that kind of thing, what you want is you want a database that is very responsive, right? Since you have a limited, in this case, it would be a limited corpus of data. You need something very responsive and that can get you to the point that you need. You don't need, you don't need something that's very involved. Something that's going to contain, millions upon millions of data points and things like that. So you could have your data to draw from something as simple as Supabase, and Supabase is fast and quick. So you could cobble together something relatively quickly and easily, to the extent of how well you're going to have an experience. That I think is.
Yeah.
That's
So,
what we're gonna,
so
the
then
time's
my question is, what's the schema for the Supabase database of data about your parent? Go ahead, Brian.
And no, I was just going to say, like, here's the thing. Yes, I would use like a Pinecone or Supabase because that's the technology that we use for vector storage right now. And I'm sure there's leading, cutting, bleeding edge new versions of that maybe I'm not aware of. But that is still like a SQL database at the end of the day. You can write basic SQL commands inside of Supabase. That's a language that's not going to like die out. I mean, we still have C and C++ and things like that. And those have been around for decades. C has been around for decades. So I would feel confident that something like a SQL database or something where I could download the raw schema of it and the raw data. Then what I would personally do, let's say I was going to start this project, maybe not even just for my mom, maybe I was just going to start whatever, living relatives I have. I'm going to interview them twice a month. And I'm just going to do it on calls, right? And track the calls. Well, I also want to make sure that's like on an external hard drive that's using at least today's like USB-C type, something that's like at least at the forefront. I would, like do a USB-A or something that could go. We've all had connectors and lightning connectors that kind of go out of style. It gets harder and harder to throw a VHS tape in somewhere where there's data. So you're going to have to update this over time anyway. But me personally, I would put it on a hard drive that was fairly basic, that had redundancies of the SQL database and all the knowledge, and then put that in something like, whatever your safety deposit boxes or whatever people find to be a safe place to have it, because I wouldn't want it necessarily in the cloud. I wouldn't want to rely on that. I would definitely want to have redundancies, especially for something that's like this valuable, that if lost or corrupted. So I would never just have like one version of this. I would make sure that multiple versions, so that fires, natural disasters, things happen, there's still an ability for this to exist long into the future. So I would probably build something basic, just to answer your first question, like how would I do it today? I think my full attention right now would be on gathering of the data and asking people to tell stories. And I would just let that take care of it, because I would want to hear how they told the stories, how they interacted. I would want to film people on like a simple Zoom or Google Meet or whatever, and just ask people like my uncles and stuff like that about different things in their life and how do they experienced it, and what do they remember from, the Bay of Pigs invasion? What do they remember from, getting under your desk and practicing for nuclear fallout? What do they remember from those days and like the tensions of that? I remember my relatives telling me about that time and thinking that there was an imminent possibility, during, with missiles on Cuba and stuff. That was a very real thing. But I didn't live through that. I just remember people telling me stories. So I would want to learn about that stuff, historical things, JFK being shot, like, I remember like I would want my daughter to ask me about where was I when the Challenger blew up, things like that are points in time, but also their experiences. So to me, it's if you did anything today, it's to literally have the first conversation. Like that's it. That's all you literally have to worry about, because I don't necessarily think the technology is there to do this reliably in the way I would want it to be. But I also don't think we're more than 5 years out from that being the fact. What will be the same is that you're still going to have raw data. You're still going to have the data and the ability to organize it. And I wouldn't even say go as far as like you have to have it super organized. There will probably be an AI tool that will help you further do that. The rocket ship conundrum, right? Do you build a rocket ship today and go to Mars, or do you wait 2 years to a better, fusion engine and get there in 90 days, right? And pass the first ship. I don't know, but I think that's the way we're going, especially when we look at what we have for AI in terms of its ability to correctly map and organize and clean up data. That's getting better and better and better every single year. It's able to look at like really messy metadata and put things together that previously would have just taken hundreds of man hours to do. Now I believe AI is going to be able to do that for you. So I don't know. Like I know I could build some version of this that might be somewhat fun for me to use or nice if I was able to chat back and forth with my mom's version of a clone, probably in just a chat feature. What I really need to do is you don't get back time. So if you're going to be serious about it, if this show sparked an interest of you doing this with your current relatives that are alive, my answer is forget about the technology. Start having conversations and have them often and just make it part of your life to just keep having it. By the way, probably be super fun to get on calls multiple times over the month and talk to my relatives. It's a great excuse to do it and meet up. And I think we all get, I'll just speak for my family. It gets easy, right? Oh, I know what they're doing. I know what they're doing, or whatever. And then somebody unexpectedly passes away, and with them, you lose all that knowledge,
So this is distilled down to an adage, which is the data has to precede the AI representation of the data.
Yeah.
So yeah, start collecting if you can in your spare time.
It might be able to fill in some gaps. I'm not saying that like my mom grew up in Brooklyn, right? So Brooklyn during certain years would have absolutely influenced, and where she grew up on Flatbush, right? Would have influenced her worldview to some point. Catholic, there's a lot of little data points I could probably put in there that the AI could probably make a jump from here to here, especially in the future, and go, well, all things given, if you were living on Flatbush, that's global data. Like we can cross-reference that and go, like, if you were living in Flatbush, this is what it would be like going down the road. You would see these types of cars, whatever. Well, I don't need to necessarily get that from my dad as he remembers it about my mom. That stuff, my mom was in that environment, and I can grab and use AI to help fill in the gaps, but you still need the initial data. Otherwise, you're going to have something that probably feels very distant and not a true representation. The last thing I'll say on this too, Andy, is, there's the famous saying, you die twice. Once the day you die, and the second time is the last time anybody says your name. And so I think this is the future of AI is pushing into that, where it's possible that somebody will be able to have conversations with the great grandparents of whatever that you would have never met in person, but you could still faithfully and reliably. And that's, by the way, defined by the family who's in charge, to Jimmy's point, controlled by the family who should have access to it, not some other company, to do that. And so that gives me a lot of hope for the future, because I think that would be really, really amazing. But it's kind of irrelevant if you don't grab the data first.
Just what I think I would be inclined to do is not even attempt to do a video representation, just try to get a really good voice clone and do a full real-time voice interaction with, my father, for example. And that would require building a database, Supabase or Pinecone behind the model, behind the application that's using a model. And I wouldn't be too terribly concerned about, the open source private version of this at this point. Not for my father, who, there's a very small range of people, counting them on one hand, who would ever interact with this data or be able to make any, take any benefit from it. So that might be my first exercise, just to get a voice interaction, because, plenty of voice recordings from video, etc. And I think you can train a voice clone pretty easily. They can do it on 15 seconds of voice effectively. But I think if you provide more than that, you'll get a broader range of articulation by that person. So anyway, this has been very interesting, and gives me yet another project that I need to start working on at some point. And the application for collecting the data and parking it in a Supabase, that's something I think I could build pretty quickly. Okay, so let's wrap this show today. Before we go, I invite all of you who are listening to join our community at the Daily AI Show community.com. And there you'll be added to a Slack workspace where you can correspond on various subjects with all of the people who are listeners on our show. And the most frequent visitors are here in our chat on YouTube. And so we're watching as they discuss this, as we are discussing it. And then we have some shows coming up for you this week. Brian, anything to say about tomorrow's show?
Yeah, we're going to pivot. I think, initially we were going to talk about the MIT 95%, but we scheduled that like 2 weeks ago before Beth was out for a bit. And honestly, we've covered it several times on the show. So I think we'll pivot tomorrow. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. That caught me off guard. What I was going to say is, I think tomorrow I'd like to talk. I think the three of us could, and I think Carl might be here as well, talk about Jensen Huang was in an interview when he was talking about the productivity paradox, and just talking about the idea that as more drudgery gets taken over by AI, that allows both companies, individuals to take more ideas they had off the shelf and actually work on them where they would have just been shelved because there just wasn't enough time. And he also talks about the 4-day work week and where that may come from and stuff like that. So I think it's just a really good conversation to have, especially since you just made literally with the last couple of days made some comments about it. So I think it's a good time to come back around and just talk about the idea of the 4-day work week, the productivity paradox, what really happens if we successfully take away 50, 75%, 95% of redundant drudgery that we all do as part of our lives or part of our work. And if that goes away, where does the backfill come in? Where does the void come in? And how do we fill that? So I think that's what will be tomorrow's conversation. Sounds like a good one to me. And then
Excellent.
Wednesday, the news, and then Thursday and Friday, I don't remember, but that's what we have coming up between now and Wednesday.
Great. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. Junmi, send us.
Aloha.